Hi, I'm McCoy-Ward, and thank you so much for tuning in today. Really appreciate it. If you're enjoying this video series, please remember to click the like button and drop a comment below. I love to hear from you all. Thank you so much. And let's get into today's video then. Let's get into part 3. We're going to be talking about businesses. We're going to be talking about gold confiscation, the government and the media propaganda that was spread at the time. We're then going to go into a few other things before giving you some recommendations for protection. Hi and welcome back to part 3 of your video series on the patterns from the Great Depression and how they relate to today, how we can learn from what happened back then in order to make better and safer decisions for our future. Okay, let's start with business then. And again, we're going to be going off diary entries from the Great Depression. So each one of these that I read out is a diary entry, or it's from a historical book at the time, not a modern day book. Business. Business is dead, and even the big department stores are empty. Many businesses today are operating at less than 20% and losing a fortune. I don't know how much longer they can hold out. Again, remember this is early 1930s. It doesn't say the date of this entry, but I would assume it's somewhere in 1931. And the point that we want to look at from these entries, these initial entries, what's happening right now? What's happening in the hospitality sector right now? Businesses are operating at about 25% capacity. This is government mandated in many places, or the restaurants, for example, coffee shops, people can eat or drink outside. Now, I don't know about you, but during winter, being in the Midwest USA or being in the United Kingdom in the winter, I don't really fancy eating my meal or having a drink outside with snow falling on my head. So we can see what's happening here, and we can see the pattern, the correlation already between the two periods. But bear in mind, all of this happened during the Great Depression over a period of a few years. Right now, it's happened over a period of a few months. And the diaries, they're very clear. They go on to explain the fallout from all of these closures and these difficulties with the businesses. People are saying today, oh, the government's going to save the day. Everything will go back to normal. We have a vaccine. We have all of this. No, ladies and gentlemen, that's not how it works. What's actually more likely to happen is that the businesses are going to go into employment scarring, and it's going to get worse. More people are going to lose their jobs. More businesses are going to collapse as we go into 2021. It's not going to be this big revival, as it were, as people are making out. Another entry. Business issues came in waves. One of the telltale signs, again, I'm just changing the language a little bit here, that we noticed before any form of problem was half-price sales in the store windows. Businesses were empty all over the city, but people kept naively saying, don't worry, we will reopen again soon, or they will reopen again soon. The entry says, quite clearly here, they never did. So if you remember my walk-around videos, Cardiff, London, I went down to Cornwall, some of these cities I've been going around because the media is manipulating us. They're using propaganda. It's not news. They're saying businesses, yes, they're bad, but don't worry, things will come back. Those walkarounds that I've done, and please check them out if you haven't seen them already, show the truth of what is happening in business areas, high streets, shopping malls. All of these places, the businesses are collapsing. They are not getting better. And of course, what's the telltale sign? This entry said, sales, 50% off, 60% off, etc. And it's saying here this was usually the sign that was up in the window just before the business collapsed. Next entry. There was heavy deflation in merchandise prices. The dollar today buys 2 to 3 times what it did 2 years ago. Very interesting. Small businesses went bankrupt first and very quickly, usually within the first 3 years. Many small businesses were actually still doing okay, but by offering lines of credit and trying to help their local community, they ended up going bankrupt when the people couldn't pay for the goods and services they had purchased. The large chains didn't offer credit lines to people and so were in a much stronger position. So what this is saying, the big stores, they didn't give lines of credit. They didn't help the people out like the smaller businesses did, the smaller family, local community businesses, which were in the communities. Again, these are the best businesses. They're in the community, they support the community supports them. It was the chain stores that basically said, no credit lines, nothing, we're not helping you at all. And they were the ones that survived where the smaller businesses collapsed. The big stores held out for a lot longer because they had more access to lines of finance. Big companies received government loans, but there was nothing for the small businesses. This is why small businesses collapse so easily. Again, we're seeing these patterns here. What's happening at the moment? Yes, some of the small businesses have been given a form of loan, but really the big loans have been going to some of the big companies, as they always have done. Again, I've talked about this a lot, but this is a mistake. It's not the big companies that pay the taxes. It's not the big companies that support the communities. It's not the big companies that employ the most people. It is the SMEs, the small to medium-sized enterprises. The governments make this mistake. Every time we go through this cycle, they support the big companies, the big businesses, the people that funds their political campaigns and all this sort of nonsense, instead of looking after the smaller businesses in the community, who are the ones that support everything. People are most upset by the business closures much more than the reduced days or hours. People are just grateful for having a job, but the government feels that the minimum wage has to be higher, thereby interfering with the free market. Interesting. What's happening right now? People are objecting after business owners speak out against the policy. They say they will need to make more layoffs. The president insists that it's the right thing to do. He says people cannot be paid so little for their work. And then a little while later, so this is, I don't know how many years later this entry comes in, because it's from a different diary here. The president's plan has ended in disaster. The higher wages resulted in reduced hours and eventually more layoffs. This is pretty obvious. I mean, anyone who studied Economics 101, taken that class at school, would know this. You cannot manipulate the free market. Wages are what wages are, especially in a depression where you have little output because there isn't much demand for that output. When you start interfering with wages and interfering with the free market in these sort of situations, it causes a lot of problems. We've seen this as well in other countries where the minimum wage just goes up to this ridiculous rate. And again, I'm not speaking out against the minimum wage. I'm not talking about a emotional response to this. What I'm saying is a purely financial, economic response. So what I'm saying is based on mathematics, not on emotion. And I say that because people will start in the comments, oh, you shouldn't say things like this and whatever. But this is mathematical. When you interfere with the free market, it interferes and crashes the economy if you do it to quite an extreme extent. Guys, if you are appreciating all the work, the hundreds of hours of work that went into creating this video series, if you could please do me a quick favor and just click the like button for me. I would really appreciate that. Why not subscribe to the channel if you haven't already? Share this video with a friend or family member, and why not leave me a comment below? Doctors and dentists have given up their offices and are using their home as their office. The same is true with lawyers. Imagine trying to get away with that today. I think not. December 1932, this entry. Many insurance companies have gone broke. This includes life insurance. What a disaster. It raises the question, who insures the insurers? No one, it seems. Okay, let's move on to gold confiscation here then. This entry is March of 1933. This is pretty interesting. I think you're going to find this quite shocking. The banks have been ordered to turn in all gold. So this is people who had safety deposit boxes, any banks that were holding gold for people or for their own reserves. Next entry, again, March 1933. Gold ownership is now illegal. The government will pay $20.67 per ounce for all gold that's turned in. Again, March 1933. The government demands the names of anyone who withdrew gold from the bank after February 1st, 1933. These people will be shamed publicly into returning the gold or taxed or punished. 100 million US dollars in gold is returned in the first 2 days over fear of arrest. Many people are still to this day not aware of the gold confiscations that took place in March of 1933. I'm not going to go into too much detail on it right now because the entries will cover it, but it was deemed an illegal act. Next entry. After my gold was confiscated in March under Executive Order 6102, it was then revalued from $20.67 per ounce up to $30 per ounce. This was theft by any other name. To add to the injustice, the government has just devalued the dollar. This has caused a rise in food prices and riots ensue. So I think we need to establish what happened here. The government does a confiscation. They pay the people $20 per ounce. They then, after the confiscation, revalue the gold to $30 per ounce. So already there's a 50% uplift, which is stolen from the people. And then, to add insult to injury, the government revalues or devalues the US dollar. So people that got $20 for their gold, their $20 is now worth less as well. This was a huge theft. And people say the government are so great. The government in those days were very honorable, not like the government of today. I hear this a lot. Can you imagine the government stealing 50% of your money or your gold or whatever today? People say it wouldn't happen. Well, look, it happened back then. This is why you can't be too careful. Again, we have some later diary entries here. The government threat of shame and punishment was a bluff. No one has been shamed or tried to my knowledge. Next entry. No action was taken against gold hoarders. Very unfair. This was a different diary. December 1933. The original confiscation of my gold by the president was deemed an illegal action by the courts. Government ordered to compensate, but they refused to do so for fear of deepening the depression. Now the Secretary of the makes a new demand. Everyone must turn in their gold at $20.34 per ounce. They will not receive the $36 per ounce market rate for their gold. Another theft! Exclamation mark. This time I will not turn in what little I have left. Interesting. April 1937, so of course we're 4 years later now. We never received any compensation for our gold theft. We're now going to move on to the next section, which is government and media, or should I say government and media propaganda. This entry is 1929, so this is right near the start of the Depression. The magazines and newspapers are full of articles telling people to buy stocks, real estate and other assets at these runaway prices. There's now an update note next to this entry. Update note 1931. Many of the people that took the advice of these newspapers are now bankrupt and lost 80% of their money. Gosh, imagine that. Imagine you lost 80% of your money right now. Next entry. I've come to the startling conclusion that the government cannot be trusted. They lie at every opportunity. I dare not share my views with others. People are even surprisingly starting to lose faith in the newspapers. Ha! The newspapers. Imagine a comment like that today, where people say, I'm not sure if I believe the media, what they're saying. Back then, it was probably a couple of % of people didn't believe the media, the newspapers. Now it's probably the majority of people that I know. And anyone that does believe in the newspapers and media, I just say be very careful there. August 1931. The newspapers are constantly trying to minimize the panic and in fact do a disservice to the people by not telling the truth. These are quite startling statements or diary entries of the time, because you weren't really supposed to criticize the government. People didn't really criticize the media of the time as well. So these are personal diary entries. This is where it starts to get a little bit more extreme. The government tries to pay off its debt by printing money. Prices skyrocket and violence breaks out because wages don't keep pace. This, ladies and gentlemen, again, is just history repeating what's happening right now. US have just created another 40% of US dollars into existence. Imagine 40% of new currency going into the monetary supply. This is madness. And of course, wages don't keep pace. They never do. People are always the last to get any benefit. When the government printed money, prices went up 40 to 100%. These are prices in the stores, but wages remained the same. The government fooled us again. I now realize I must understand this mysterious world of the bankers to have any hope for the future. Very wise words. A number of anti-free market policies came out about fixing and increasing wages. The minimum wage of $7.50 per week for a department store clerk went up to $14 per week. And later on it says layoffs were inevitable. That's from the Diary of Benjamin Roth, that one. People are still in shock, even years on, that this has happened when the government said everything was fine. Even the newspapers said everything is fine. No need to panic, they said. No need to panic. All will be well. July 33. People start speculating again in the stock market, believing the propaganda that the crisis is over after a media frenzy. Again, another entry, 1933. The government plans are not working. Money printing, putting money into the hands of people, buying bank bonds, making business loans with created money. None of it has worked. Ladies and gentlemen, what are we doing right now all over again? We're doing the exact same mistakes of the 1930s, of the 1873 panic, of even the panics, the depressions before them. It's the same thing over and over again. It doesn't work. The only thing that works is to let the free market correct. We know this, but the government won't do it. Mental health and violence. Insanity and suicide. Remember, this language is of the day, by the way. These are entries. Insanity and suicide among prominent businessmen is on the increase. There are now constant riots, suicides, and mental health issues as a result of many people losing everything. Tempers are short and there is constant violence due to anger and hunger. Remember this. 1932. Hold-ups and murders are now an everyday occurrence. Home invasions are common, and you cannot walk the streets after dark. Please remember these 4 entries here from these diaries, because these have been rewritten in the history books. You don't believe me? Check for yourself. You won't find anything on this, on the suicides, on the mental health from the depression that actually came about. You won't find anything on the violence and as a result of hunger. You won't see anything about all the murders that took place on a daily occurrence, the home invasions, not being able to walk the streets at dark. All this occurred, and yet where it's not in any of the history books. So just be very careful, be very vigilant. Next, let's move on to politics then. History repeating. President Hoover blamed the financial crisis on greedy people buying stocks and thought nothing of people's spending habits and production going overseas. Again, exactly the same pattern today. November 32. Democratic candidate Franklin D. Roosevelt wins the presidency, offering the New Deal to the people. He then says, let's pray the New Deal is what he says it is. We have fallen for this New Deal before in another life. Update in 1940. Remember, this is 8 years later. This is his second term, Roosevelt. The New Deal was a sham and saved nothing. There was no New Deal. I'm just bringing your attention to that because we're having a lot of talks at the moment of these New Deals in politics. I won't comment on the New Deal, but please read between the lines. I'm sure you'll understand what I'm alluding to here. Next entry. Groups of hundreds of people are trucked into Ohio, Pennsylvania, and West Virginia in order to disrupt the Memorial Day celebration. Violent clashes ensue. No one knows who paid for these people to travel. The reason I'm including this entry is because, again, I'm not American, but I've heard this mentioned a lot in America of people being bussed in for whatever reason. I don't know if they are on the left or on the right. I have no idea about the politics of it. But when I saw this entry, and I also saw it in another diary, I thought it's quite unusual that I thought this was a modern day thing, the bussing in of people, but it was here in the 1930s as well. The general belief was to let the bad debt collapse first. Then the idea was to let the financial system clean itself out naturally. However, the new president thought he was smarter and decided otherwise, only prolonging the crisis further and even making it worse. Again, we're seeing the same thing again today. Same thing all over again. October 1941. The great effect of President Roosevelt's plan is wearing off rapidly. Bear in mind, this is 41. Remember, this started in 29. Despite many of the feelings that it was just a ploy to get votes, we now know for a fact. Again, we all know this. Politicians, they say they're going to do all of these things to get the votes, and then it never really works. And I can tell you for a fact, having studied all of these depressions going back hundreds of years, all of these new deals and all of this new currency creation, we're going to pay for this, we're going to pay for that. It doesn't work like that. This is mathematics. It's financial economics. Money isn't just created, even though the MMT crowd would tell you that's modern monetary theory, will tell you that it is and it doesn't have any effect. It's not true. It does have effect. If MMT was true, Japan wouldn't be in a 30-year depression that they are right now. Next entry. Radical socialism is the order of the day in March of 1934, with demands from the people to the government for work as well as debt forgiveness. Very interesting. You'll see why this becomes interesting in a moment. But debt forgiveness, what are we hearing about at the moment? We're hearing about debt forgiveness. In 1936, they voted for Democratic candidate Roosevelt again with another New Deal, and people fell for it all over again. So again, we're going back a little bit here. The entries jump back and forth. After people voted for the New Deal, which was supposed to be a way to make everyone more prosperous, you ready for this, guys? Roosevelt actually raised the money needed for the New Deal from the earnings of American workers. Talk about irony. You vote for what you want to come about, and then you get taxed for it. With greater prosperity, the radical talk diminishes. People now want the government to have less control of their life since proving incompetent. Again, what do we see here? We see all of this coming full circle. We see it going from people absolutely starvation level, where they are requesting what they claim here is radical socialism, to finally those people, and again, we see references to this today. Now, these same people are saying, actually, we don't want socialism. We don't want some of these other things. We want to go back to having as little government interference as possible, because the reason for this, once they came out of the cycle, out of the Great Depression, people realized that it wasn't the government that saved them. It was the free market. Well, we could say it was World War II as well, but we'll put that to the side. That's a conversation for another day. And then I know many of you often ask me for my recommendation on the best diary that you can read from these periods, from the Great Depression. So I'm going to recommend to you today this book here. This is the fantastic book. And one of the things that I've been referencing a lot of this is The Great Depression, a Diary by Benjamin Roth. You've heard me reference a number of his entries in these videos as we go forward. I highly recommend this book. I would say this is the best one. I would say it's the easiest to read. And from what I've seen, there aren't any alterations and things like that to his entries. It looks to be clean and as it was of the time. So now as we come into the conclusion, I want to talk about some of the greatest wisdom that I picked up from the Diary of Benjamin Roth, as well as some of these other diaries. It's amazing how they all came to these same conclusions together. So here we go. This is fantastic. All the best economists of the day were wrong at just about every turn. The government and newspapers could not be trusted. Not too much of your capital should be risked on one particular theory because you may be wrong. Again, I say that a lot. Don't risk everything on one investment class. As a general rule, only strong companies are worth investing into. A certain amount of cash, bonds, or other liquid securities should always be set aside for protection or to seize unexpected opportunities. A major risk should not be taken for a minor profit. Wow, what a line. That's fantastic. A major risk should not be taken for a minor profit. The investor should consider his capital most precious. It must not be lost or tied up. You must be more interested in broad economic movements than in day-by-day fluctuations of the stock market. Again, I say this to you a lot. Don't focus on today and this week, the trading aspect. Instead, focus on the bigger picture. Look 5 to 10 years out. The investor is interested only in that information which affects the long-term trend. The people, and here we go, here's a big one. The people who bought stocks on margin were all eventually not only wiped out, but owed money on top, which was chased years later, and most never escaped the debt until they paid it back. Guys, if you are on margin right now and you're doing this very heavily, just be very, very careful. I would advise against it personally. I only invest with my own capital. I don't do options or margin or anything like that. So just be very careful. A few other recommendations then as we collect all of this together. Only deposit your money with the largest banks, not the small banks, as these were first to go bankrupt. I'm not sure if that still applies today. I would say pretty much all the banks are at risk right now. Life insurance proved to be a cushion during the Depression, but later also went bankrupt. In prosperous times, a person should be cautious and save their capital and be careful not to overexpand their business or to go too deeply in debt. Don't rely upon better days in the business to pay off that debt, because those better days may never come. The only reliable investments during the Great Depression were government bonds and life insurance, which people could borrow against initially. Again, I'm not saying this is the advice for today. I just want to add that caveat. This was the advice he's saying for back then. If anything, I don't think government bonds and life insurance are your most safe bet today, personally. But now I want to share with you the most profound statement that I read from all of these books, all of these diaries combined. So I hope you're ready for this one. After 8 years of pump priming and other trick methods of bringing back prosperity, it is my conclusion that none of them are any good. In our capitalistic system, we must let the forces of competition, as well as demand and supply, work things out in a natural way. No man or group of men is smart enough to control prices or the supply and demand curve. Wow. I think that is the most profound statement that just wraps everything up that I talk about on a weekly basis. Benjamin Roth actually wanted his diaries to be in the public domain. That was his wish. He requested that all of these diaries be shared as wide as possible. So it brings me great honor today to do that and to share a number of these entries with you. Roth also recommends another book called The Tragic Era by Claude Bowers. This was a book about the Panic of 1873. I've read this book. I highly recommend that you read it as well. It is a fantastic book if you can get your hands on a copy of it. So my closing question to you is, and this is a very serious question, if history repeats itself and you've seen the patterns that we've talked about in this video series, if there is another Great Depression coming over the next few years or whenever it comes, here's the question. Are you prepared for it? Thank you so much for watching this video series today. I really appreciate your time. Please remember to click the like button, subscribe to the channel, and make sure to share these videos, share this series with those in your network. I really appreciate it. Please leave me a comment below. Apart from that, God bless. I'll see you all next time.